The town of Farmington. Respecting history, planning the future.
By thanking all of you for being here this evening. This is going to be a presentation meeting for options for the Farmington High School. And I would like to call this meeting to order since this is an official building committee meeting. And just to introduce myself, my name is Bill Wadsworth and I am chair of the Farmington High School Building Committee. The other members on the committee are Gene Barron, who's here with us, Justin Bernier, Johnny Carrier, Hillary Donald, Dan Kleinman, and Michelle Hamilton. We were formed in January of 2016 by the Town Council, and our charge was to respond to the statement of needs of the Town of Farmington Board of Education. And what we are working with, Kat, we can get the picture? I'll try this. Oh, there we go. What we're working with is a 1928 original building, which is in the green on the lower left of the screen. That building is now 88 years old. In 1952, there was an addition. 1964, there was an addition. 1978, there was an addition. 1996, there was an addition. And 2003 was the last addition was put on the school. That's a total of 5 different additions in the past 88 years. As a result of the expanse of the school and the age of some of the parts of the school, we have certain issues that we're facing almost school-wide. One of them is code requirements. Another one is maintaining ADA requirements both in the building and the athletic fields. One is safety and security requirements. We have 23 different access points and exit points in the building. And then there are space needs within this existing facility along with the sprawl. Since it's always built as a single-story building, we have no vertical movement up and down, so the school just kept going out and out. Our goal is to address all the issues of the statement of needs. Now, we're not looking for a 10 or 15-year solution to the high school. We're looking for a 30, 40, or 50-year solution to the high school. And also, we're considering educational requirements, and I think the word these days is 21st century learning. So the committee to date, since we got formed in January of 2016, we have engaged an architect, Castle Booz Associates out of New Britain, and they are going to present 3 concept options this evening, which we can all discuss. And then one of those options will be selected for moving forward, probably somewhere along in the end of January. And from that, they will prepare a schematic design on the selected option. We've also engaged the owner's project managers, and they're helping us to maintain schedule and to develop soft costs for the project. We've also engaged the construction manager, and they will develop construction costs on the 3 concepts, which should be ready for view somewhere along the end of January. And then from there, we'll pick the one we're going to move forward with, and then we'll develop a construction cost on the schematic design. The committee work going forward, we're presenting to the community tonight and looking for your input. We'll present to the Board of Education next Monday and to the Town Council next Tuesday with these 3 options. Again, looking for feedback, issues, comments, and concerns. And then on the end of January, we'll re-present to the Board of Education and the Town Council for a determination of which option to go with. And then from there, we'll pursue the final scope and cost estimate for consideration for a referendum at the end of April. So again, thank you all for attending. Appreciate you being here, and I will turn this now over to Superintendent Greeter.
Thank you all for attending tonight's community meeting. I'm going to provide a very quick history on this project and the facility needs of the high school, some of which was just reviewed. So the following studies, reviews, and reports related to the Farmington High School facility took place since 2013. We did an acoustic and auditorium study in 2013, and that study identified needs in this auditorium as well as our music instructional spaces. And then in 2014, the Office of Civil Rights did a review here at the high school that happens every 10 years, identifying several ADA compliance issues. A full facility review was conducted in 2015 by Tecton, identifying needs throughout the school building, which are outlined in the project statement of need, which is on the website. And then in 2015, we did create the statement of need. It was again, approved by the Board of Education per Farmington Town Code 53-2, and the Town Council established the Farmington High School Building Committee in January 2016. The New England Association of Schools and Colleges, NEASC, completed their review in 2015-16 of Farmington High School, and this report identified facility issues as well, which I'm going to highlight in a few moments. So given these studies, reviews, and reports, the following FHS facility issues have been identified. I'll start with the infrastructure deficiencies. So state and federal requirements were highlighted. The building and the athletic fields do not meet numerous state and federal codes, including ADA. Security, after doing a review of security in 2012, we found many issues here at the high school which we've tried to address, but the facility remains the facility. So there are security issues. We mentioned those 23 points of entry and really no easily identifiable main entrance. And then facility infrastructure, an aging HVAC system, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, most of which are at the end of their useful life. We have a building envelope and insulation issue causing indoor temperatures to fluctuate with a lack of reliable heat and excessive warmth in the learning spaces throughout the school year. So students often have to wear layers here, and our teachers do as well, because it changes if you're in different spaces in the building. Inefficient building layout, and if you went on the tour, you experienced that, and old systems creating high energy costs on an annual basis. We do have recurring maintenance issues, some planned, and we put those in our budget, many unanticipated major repairs. On the teaching and learning side, we are a school and a school district known for the education we provide. We're consistently ranked in the top schools in Connecticut, and even on a national level, we're a P21 national exemplar district, and that includes our high school here. And so one of the things that I'll highlight first is accreditation. So the New England Association of Schools and Colleges placed FHS on warning for one of the accreditation standards, Community Resources for Learning, and this is primarily due to the facility. And according to NEASC, facility and space issues are constraining the implementation of curriculum and instruction, and there's a lack of full compliance with state and federal laws related to the facility at FHS. There's inadequate facility layout and space issues, and that is implementing teaching, learning, and programming. Undersized spaces like our auditorium that we're all in, cafeteria, media center, and some science classrooms. We have a high daily classroom usage, which strains the facility, and it limits current and future programs. We do require more space in our classrooms, more classrooms in the school. There's a lack of collaborative workspaces to support 21st century curriculum instruction and programming. Primarily a one-story layout, which creates inefficient student traffic flow during the school day. We have to use the circle for students to pass through just so students can get to classes on time. This sprawling facility is caused from these multiple additions since that original 1928 building, and it does not align to today's existing and future curriculum, instruction, and programming. So that's an overview of the issues with the facility. Thank you so much.
I'd like to introduce Chuck Booz from Castle Booz Associates.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening, all. After almost 3 months of visioning and numerous staff meetings with the administration and school staff, I'm pleased to report that the final draft of the educational specifications has been completed, and it will be submitted to the Board of Education for their consideration during the next couple meetings. The ed specs define the vision and goals for the Farmington High School project. We are now at this project's design stage where the written word, the ed specs, will be transformed into graphics to define what the building could possibly look like. These are concept proposals that we'll be putting forth tonight. Please know that the designs, the design that we're going to be showing you are a work in progress, and they will be refined as we go along, based on input from the public, input that hopefully we'll receive tonight, as well as the other project stakeholders, administration and staff. The building committee made it quite clear to us that we're to seek out comments from the public and process those and incorporate whatever suggestions that are worthwhile into this project. The project will be presented by Paul Dominoff. Paul is a resident of Farmington, and he's an associate principal with Castle Booze and the chief project designer for this project. And he'll be assisted by Luke McCoy, who heads up our landscape architectural studio. Gentlemen.
Hi, everybody. Got it. All right, sorry for the delay. So my name's Paul Dominoff. I'm an architect with Castle Booze. So tonight we're going to show you three concepts, 2 addition renovation and 1 new. Sure, can you hear me? Sorry. Who here went to the visioning workshop? I'm just curious, back in the fall. Okay, there's some people, good. So some of this you'll recognize. Big picture, what we want to think about tonight is that the facility, we need to take a global look at this facility. Some of the administration went to a Harvard workshop 2 years ago, Kathy? So to learn about some ideal learning environments, and these are some of the concepts that they talked about during the program up there, and it applies directly to what we're trying to do here at this when we're planning this facility. These are ideal learning environments, and we have light, flexibility, independence, collaboration, reflection, creativity, exhibition, and joys. So these are all areas that we want to explore when we start thinking about laying out a facility for the next 50 years. So for those who went to the workshop with Frank Locker in the fall, this diagram pretty much sums up what the visioning effort was about. And what it has to say is that this is how we could organize a new or renovated facility. This is called a relationship diagram. And what it does is it shows all the functions that happen in the facility in the relationship to one another, if they should be adjacent to one another or separate from one another. And quickly, these clusters here represent learning communities. So the blue represents classrooms. The gray in the middle that's collaboration spaces. We'd have science rooms, and we would have teacher planning areas. So each one of these circles here are learning communities. And in Farmington, based on the population, we've determined that to be 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these learning communities, each with about 7 classrooms and a couple science rooms. So they're all sort of interdisciplinary in nature. Currently, this facility is laid out where there's departmental layout, where they'd have world language wing up on the second floor of the 1928 building, a science wing, a math. So that's not what we're trying to do moving forward. We're trying to take all the disciplines and mix them within these clusters, okay? So this is sort of the student area back here, and this is sort of the public area. And that would include things such as the gymnasium, the auditorium, cafeteria, and sort of a community zone. This black line represents a security sort of buffer between the public and the student zone. So not all the public would be allowed to travel through deep into the school. And if you see this heart right here in the middle, that represents the Learning Commons or Media Center. So what we want to do is create the Media Center as the center of the entire facility. That's where a lot of things, activity can happen, not only academic, but it could be social in nature as well for the students. So, beyond that, we have other smaller components like the alternative high school. We have administration in here and other functions. But that's the basic organization that came from the visioning. This is what we want to, this is our roadmap to lay out either a renovated facility or a new facility. So with that background, we're going to get right into, we have three options, concept A, B, and C. The first two being a renovation scenarios, and the last being a new school scenario. One last thing here. This is a blow up of one of those clusters. The circles, this is what Farmington would have in each of those clusters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 classrooms, science rooms shared with prep rooms, a collaboration breakout space, small group and meeting areas here of different sizes so you could have flexibility with different sort of conference room sizes. Teacher prep area where they could be centralized and watch all the activity going on, and some staff toilets, student toilets within the cluster so they're not leaving the cluster to go to use the restroom. And outside you would get to some specialized rooms such as special ed or tutorial spaces. These fluctuate depending on where you are in the building, but they're outside the cluster, but also adjacent to the cluster, so they don't have to go across the facility to find those spaces. We've seen this map. Bill explained it very well. Over time, this whole facility evolved, and it's become a one-story, sprawling facility that takes a long time for students to get from one point to the other, travel time, among other things. This is another diagram of the same layout, just that shows the age of the building in a quick snapshot. What you see in the red is the 2003 edition with the cafeteria. There's extension alteration projects back in 2003. That's 20 years old, or less than 20 years old. The blue represents the 96 editions that are about 20 years old, and the green represents everything that's approximately 30 years or older. Luke's going to come up here for a moment and talk about Concept A, site plan.
Thank you. As Paul mentioned, we went through a series of 3 different concepts for these, 2 of these being renovation and addition, working with some of the existing building, and then the third being a new concept. So this is the first of one of the renovations. What I've done, and hopefully everyone can hear as I point up here at the same time. So looking at the building here, the white pieces that you see, those are portions of the school we've tried to use but will be repurposed within it. Different programs potentially moved, and Paul will talk about that in a second, whereas the tan is actually where additions would be added on. So what we've been able to do is push the building more in a linear here. With that, we've looked at, if you were to come up from Route 4 and enter in, we've looked at creating the main entry now for the school right here, which is similar to where the parent drop-off now, but that would be the one main entry for buses and parents. So if you're coming through, if you were a bus, you would come up, you would have the bus drop-off here along the yellow dashed line, and you'd come back and you'd have exit right out. If you're a parent or student drop-off or pickup, you would come along the top here and you'd follow the purple and have drop-off here and come back out this way. One of the things we'd look to do is at this point here, is that would actually be designated as buses would have the right of way. So during drop-off and pickup times, when the buses have loaded up and they're leaving, they would have the right-of-way to leave the campus all in one shot, and it would allow us to use this area here to stack parents, students trying to leave and allow those buses to get out, which now there's both are trying to get out at the same time, and sometimes there's conflict that can hold up those buses, which have to drop students off and then make it to the other great schools within town. So it would force that. We're able to keep the parking adjacent to the tennis courts and also parking here. We've looked at keeping an access road along the front of the school and then parking along the side, which is currently now where you have your bus dropping a lot of you, I'm sure, parked out there now. This would also allow for parking here, and then we've introduced some parking in the back, which would allow some access into those areas that Paul talked about, which are the after hours, the gymnasium, the cafeteria, things like that, and Paul will walk through those in a minute. Additionally, what was mentioned earlier, some of the accessibility issues for the site that we have to look at addressing as part of this project. So you can see here in the blue circles, we have to provide ADA access to all of the fields. So starting with the baseball field, we have to provide access out there. We would have to renovate the dugouts because currently they're not handicap accessible. We also have to look at renovating both sets of the bleachers and press box because they're currently not accessible and we don't have egress to them. And then up top, we have to make sure we provide egress to the fields that are up there. One of the things that we've heard from the community over our first 2 weeks of presentations is a lack of fields, not only within the high school, but also within the town. So we looked at introducing a fourth full-size multi-sport field up to the top. We do that by cutting down the hill that's here so that it would be flush, and we can shift the two fields that are here and introduce another one up top. So this scheme would actually allow us to add one more field here. And again, as I mentioned, leaving the tennis courts as they are now. We know that was a new project that was done, as well as the main field and the track where they are. And what I should also note, I should forget that because it was asked. The red arrow back here, I forgot to mention, the intent of that is only for emergency access. So that would be a potential access route that would be locked and gated, but it would only be used in the emergency of if you could not exit off of Route 4 or there was traffic, too much traffic here, emergency vehicles may have to get through. That was something that came out with meeting with town staff. They really wanted to look at a second point of entry onto the campus besides just on Route 4. So in all of our schemes, you'll see this red. And that's, again, only for emergency access. It's meant to be gated and locked, a lockbox for those emergency type vehicles to get through, not to be used on a daily basis.
Move this over a little bit so you can hear better. So this is the floor plan of Concept A. Can everyone hear me back there? Good, okay. So just to orient everybody, this red dashed line represents the footprint of the existing school right now. It's a little muddy, but what I want to point out is this concept demolishes a few portions of the existing facility. I want to point them out really quick. This is the 500 section of the building, the 700 section wing of the building, and also the 800 wing of the building where the current library is. So, yeah, I got rid of those red. It's very distracting. So now that we're oriented, the big idea behind this concept is to take the clusters that we mentioned earlier and place them right in the center where the circle is right now and also east of it and stack these for 3 stories, 1, 2, 3. So we'll have 6 clusters. Each cluster has the 7 classrooms, 2 science rooms, and so on. So the big move is to put these clusters side by side, 1, 2, and then take the 1928 building and form the media center or learning commons adjacent to the learning. So the student zone, as I talked about before, is primarily right here. And we can organize all these 3 by taking the corridor that currently exists on the outside of this wall here in the auditorium, that wide corridor, and you drive it through to connect to the new single, highly visible, secure main entry. So let's walk through the school really quick. If you arrived, you'd get dropped off here, as Luke mentioned. Come in the front door. You'd get your credentials if you're public, but if you're a student, you come in. You have administration right there with your eyes out front. You would have much of your learning communities right here. We would have the Friends Room, perhaps, special services. As you go deeper into the building, this scenario keeps the cafeteria that was renovated in 2003. It also keeps the existing servery in 2003 that was renovated. However, it takes the kitchen, which is now over here and served from the front of the building, and it takes all of that and brings it around the backside with a new kitchen on the backside. We'd have a new receiving area that is discrete and not on the front of the building any longer, and we could have kitchen access. We'd keep this, I believe, is the 600 wing, and we could repurpose that for the mechanical. So this is where the sort of the back of house functions would be, all serving the new kitchen, existing servery, and cafeteria. So now we could expand the cafeteria because it is undersized. It's one of those spaces that are undersized. So it touches now this linear Main Street here. So with that connected, as we go deeper into the building, from this point on, this is all renovation. And what we have is, again, the media center or learning commons here. Keep the auxiliary gym in its current position. Keep the locker rooms, but renovate them in their current position. We could have, as an aside, the learning commons and media center would have accessory uses off of them, such as classrooms, application labs, maker spaces. Farmington High School has a great Edge studio, which is a multimedia production studio, TV. So all that would be sort of a lively, dynamic space within the 1928 building. We would have volume here, excuse me. We do have volume in this position because I'm not sure if many of you know, but the 1928 building had an original gymnasium on the backside where the band room is. So there's volume that we could have a two-story condition and spaces upstairs as well, looking down into the learning commons. But as we go deeper, auditorium, we would renovate this auditorium. We'd push out towards Route 4 and also expand the roof height to get the volume that we would like in a function auditorium that serves primarily music, and would accommodate the drama portion of the program for the proposed little studio black box theater. And band and choral would also be high volume spaces built within the existing gymnasium across the hall right there. So we have volume here. We want to create more volume here. And at the very end of this, Main Street is what we have is our tech ed shops. And stacked above this, you'll see on the next level, are the arts. So what we have at the end of this whole composition is that we have performing and visual arts and tech ed, where you could design things, come down here, build things, and collaborate all in this area of the building. So that works out pretty nicely. As you come around the building, every thing from here on up is new as well. In the gymnasium, we propose a brand new gymnasium. There's talk of doing a shelter as part of a community shelter as part of this whole complex. That would likely be the gymnasium to hold people, such as we had that storm back, I believe, in 2010. This is the other entry Luke was mentioning. Perhaps there's an event or staff entry where we could have people coming in. Instead of coming, you could come in here and come to events, but we'd have an opportunity to get people in directly to games in the gymnasium. We have a fitness room that could potentially be open to the public with glass on the outside so people can use it after hours. As we come around, finally, the existing 2003 900 wing of the building, we could think about repurposing for the alternate high school and potentially additional locker space. We have lockers up here to the very far tip of the north of it now. We could expand on that. If we go upstairs, upstairs would be, again, the two clusters stacked identical, try to be efficient as possible with our systems and our layouts. We would have the upper level of the Main Street, a little hole here that we could look down into the cafeteria space, so it'd be a double high volume here. This would all connect to a big, large stair that we've been calling the amphitheater stair. Now, there's images of this later, but it could spill down into the learning commons. We could have some of the adjacent spaces, more maker spaces, and this is a collaboration space we've kind of labeled the cafe, but all circulating around this reading area. And back over at the Performing Arts and Visual Arts section, We'd have art above here, the mezzanine level of both the studio theater and the auditorium. And, thank you, the upper level of the 900 wing, we could repurpose as well to put Board of Ed. When this building was planned, they planned for space for a stair and an elevator, so we could probably capture that and potentially add another stair. But this could house the Board of Ed in this scenario. And lastly, the uppermost floor. We have the same condition with the clusters, and we have the upper level of the 1928, we proposed that guidance could live up there. So that's concept A. Let's just go through the other concepts, then we can, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions we can talk. And Luke will start with the site plan for concept B.
Thank you. These will go a little quicker as we go through each one because some of these we have some redundancies. So this one I'll start with a little bit of that. Is this one, again, you can see in the back we've added the fourth field. We provided the same ADA accessibility to the site features such as your main stadium field, your press box, bleachers, your baseball field, dugouts. So moving forward, this one again is a renovation and addition. What you can see here is this white box and also this area here are the portions that we're looking to renovate, whereas the tan is the areas that would actually be new construction as part of it. Again, building around those bubble diagrams that you saw earlier and trying to work the program within the existing building. So once again, if you come in here, because of the scheme and it doesn't come out as far, we're actually able to push this bus drop off. So we'd propose to realign how you come in here. So now if you come up that boulevard, you'd actually enter straight into campus instead of having to come and kind of bear to the right like you do now. So you'd come straight in. Again, buses would come in this loop here. They'd come. We'd propose that they'd have the right-of-way coming out. Parents, anyone else that's parked here or picking up would make their loop through. They'd pick up, they'd come, and then they could stack here while the buses are leaving. The main entry would be here. We'd again have that building piece there, but what we've also been able to do is continue the roadway back through the back here and provide some parking to the rear of the building. So there would be some bit of parking in the back, allow access there. So you can see there's a secondary point of entry right here, and Paul talked a minute about what that correlates to in this proposed new building. We've also looked at pulling this roadway that goes along the front and actually pulling it out a little bit over that slope that's there and providing some additional parking here. That's for a different use within that portion of it. That's Board of Ed, correct, is proposed. And Paul talked about that's proposed for the Board of Ed location there. So that's why you'll see we've added some parking here, which would give direct access into the new home for Board of Education. And then, like the last scheme, we've also kept parking off to the side, which is off the side here, which is allowing not only additional parking, but entrance into functions that are on that side of the school there. This plan, again, allows us leaving your stadium field, which was new, designing around your existing tennis courts were done, and then also, as I said, keeping the baseball field, but updating the dugouts that are there. And the emergency access road again.
Okay. Just to orient everyone again with the red lines, this is the existing footprint of the current building. In this scenario, we would consider demolishing the 400, 500, 700, 800, and the cafeteria as well. This one is a more aggressive solution in terms of how much we would remove, and let's walk through it. So, starting with the existing portion, we would think about renovating this area here. Instead of having the east-west Main Street, last concept day we had it down here. This takes the clusters and flips them in sort of a north-south direction and takes the Main Street and brings it up to the northern edge of the existing gymnasium. This is the existing gymnasium box right now. So everything from this line northward, that's an addition, okay? So what this does is takes the 3-story clusters and places the learning commons almost between them. which is a really good condition to have the students in this student zone with the Learning Commons and Media Center centrally located. So that's the basic organization of this. Let's walk through it again. Visitors come in, administration out front as well, come into the student zone here, deeper into the school. We took the cafeteria and brought service in this side. We took the stage house off, actually, and brought receiving in here so you can get kitchen and servery feeding a cafeteria, which almost flows right into the Learning Commons. So it's almost one space, although this would have higher volume. This would be a lower volume in terms of the ceiling height, but all of it could be sort of one atmosphere. Very open, and we could have spaces for small group learning, large group learning, collaboration booths, things of that nature. As we go deeper down into the school, auxiliary gym remains the same, just opposite, brand new gymnasium, toilets, fitness, and some of the PE functions are over here. We could have special services off of the gallery as well. Renovate the locker rooms. We could have culinary off of this corridor. Band, choral, adjacent to the new auditorium, new stage. A black box theater again within the gymnasium volume, and at the end, again, tech ed and art above. You know, this also allows for access around the building to get to the shop spaces where you need overhead doors and things of that nature. As you go back into the 900 wing, we could again propose alternate high school and locker rooms as well. Some of the functions also include the maker spaces and applications labs, friends room, right in the student zone of the building, not in a public zone. So the majority of the day, the students would be sort of in this zone, and then they'd go to their specials and to the cafeteria through this area. Next level up is the clusters, second level, with guidance above the administration. What we could see happening in this scenario is if the public came in, got their credentials down below, they would be able to come up to guidance through a separate staircase so that they don't have to travel through the school in order to make an appointment with a guidance counselor with their child. They could come in and do their functions and then leave without going in deep into the school at all. So that's a good placement above the administration. You'd come down the gallery more off to the Performing and Visual Arts wing over here. Board of Ed is in the 1928 building, which is completely separate with its own separate entry, elevator, and things of that nature. Upper level is quite simple, very simple circulation between the clusters, opportunity for a green roof, potentially an outdoor terrace as well. And then you'd see the third level of the Board of Education as well. Okay, on to the new option, option C. Thank you.
So again, on this one, the white shown here is what would be kept of this original facility. And then in here is actually proposed for a new high school. To orient yourself, this is where your current 3 natural grass fields are up on top. So again, to walk you through, you would enter the same way, and we'd have a loop road that runs all the way around. What we'd propose is if you were a parent, a student, a teacher coming onto campus, you would come up and follow this around, and you would come to either a parking lot, or you would come through to the parent drop-off, come back, and then loop back out. What we'd have here is a second part here, which would be access road and for parking for this building that's to remain for Board of Education use. What we have dotted here in yellow would be for deliveries and bus drop-off only. So buses would come up, they'd make their way up, they'd drop off, and then they'd come back down and exit out. We've shown for deliveries off here for garbage, for cafeteria, things of that nature. And what we've also been able to do is that sloped area that's here, we've been able to carve that and use that for the building. So those clusters that Paul talked about in each of the scheme, and I'll show you in this one, the lowest level of the cluster is actually going to be almost the same elevation as your existing school is now. So when you look at it, it would kind of be called a basement, but you wouldn't actually be in a basement. You'd walk right out. Then you'd walk to above that, which would be the main level, which would be at the top of the hill, and then you'd have a second story above that. So we'd actually look at taking that down and then actually carving out some of the material here so that the school doesn't sit way up on that hill, but it sits into it and we can make the elevations work with it. We'd also look throughout this area to add to the existing vegetation to make sure that it's a nice dense buffer for the residential area that's around it as we did this. Again, we would have to upgrade the bleachers, the press box to have access to those. We were able to not touch the stadium field, the baseball field, or the tennis courts as part of this. And then to relocate those 3 fields, we looked at down here. So we'd have 1, 2, and a third multi-sport field. We weren't able to fit the additional 4th field here, but we were able to replace what was there now. And again, with that, you would have parking down here for this building, but also for athletic events, you'd have parking scattered throughout it. Similar option for the building. We also looked at keeping that 2003 piece, which houses some of your locker rooms now, down there with those fields. We thought that that may be really a neat option to have that building and be able to keep some of your athletic functions like team rooms, things like that, for the students that are accessing these fields down at the lower portion, because we do know that the high school would sit up higher and you don't want to be traveling that far back and forth during some games or during halftime, things like that. So keeping that. But the drawback is we can fit these 2 fields here, which are full-size multi-purpose field, but the 3rd field becomes more of a practice field. So you wouldn't be able to host the JV or varsity game on it, but you could use it for practice so you can rotate through when other fields are being used for games that's there. Again, the parking and the flow throughout campus would all remain the same in this scheme. It's simply the area that basically is right in here. All these pods and these clusters Paul's going to talk about, these are these 2 parts here to orient yourself, and they would look out over here. So you'd look over your fields and then also down onto Route 4. If you're coming up to enter, the thought here was it would feel like a campus, like a college campus where you're pulling, there's a lot of green space, you see the fields, and then you see the building set up and back there as you enter it. With that, I'll turn it over to Paul to talk about the building.
So, as Luke mentioned, the position of this new facility is driven by probably the biggest opportunity on this site is the views from up on top of that hill. You know, if you think back, the original position of the 1928 building, the original designers and builders probably had that in mind where they positioned it on top of the hill way back. So this could, we could do a similar type move and take advantage of those fields that are on top of the hill and position it so that, as Luke mentioned, you get to the top of Monteith Drive. What you would see, I'd like to go back just for a moment. What you would see at the top of this hill is sort of a green belt of all the campus in front of you, and then have a view of the facility up on the hill oriented towards that approach. So, with that, these are the clusters on the lowest level, and as Luke mentioned, they're essentially dug into the hillside with a courtyard between them. This could be similar to what the senior patio is now, but it's a little quadrangle if you think about it. And at the lower level, you would have a connection to the shop spaces in tech ed where they could have overhead doors and access directly to the outside, and we could, within the hill, this is all unexcavated, you could put some storage and mechanical functions that don't need daylight or windows. So as you'll see as you go upstairs, you know, the whole Main Street concept that we've been putting forward on concept A and B, this arcing motion here is the same concept positioned on top of the hill, all oriented towards the view towards the south. Even the clusters at the tips, the breakout space could be all glass, so it's overlooking the Farmington River. So if we go upstairs, this is the main level where most of the facility would be. And so if you remember from Luke's site plan, student and visitors would be dropped off here instead of having a direct linear progression through the building with the main street. This could bend to form into the hillside and have the clusters basically projecting out off the hill. You'd have glass all across the front here, oriented towards the Farmington River. And as you approach the building, this is the student zone again, public zone back here. You'd come in, administration up front, right to the media center, learning commons, more collaboration space. We could have the culinary program here off of this spine, this amphitheater, or another collaboration space. Oversized stairs could be here. Leads right to the cafeteria. Receiving could be here with a new kitchen, servery, feeding. We could have seating against the glass, overlooking the views out towards the river. And at the end, we could have some special services like the Friends Room adjacent to the cafeteria, art as well, stacked above Tech Ed below. So this is where most of the students would live, and other than being in their clusters traveling vertically, this is sort of the heart of the school. As we saw in Frank's diagram, that's the heart right there, right in the middle. So if you were coming in from the public side or staff entry, we have a single entry, a shared lobby between the auditorium and the gymnasium. Here we have a double gymnasium plus an auxiliary gymnasium, whereas the other two scenarios we were always showing using the existing old gym for the auxiliary gymnasium. So all the PE functions and fitness could be here. Again, this could be accessed for the public from outside. Have the lockers inboard. We could have auditorium with a choral and band and practice rooms between them. Black box theater adjacent. So this is sort of the performing arts wing over this on this side, and the PE side over here. Receiving on the back side. Luke showed perimeter road. We could have receiving back here. The uppermost level, clusters again, gallery space. These represent open to below, where you could look down into the cafeteria, look down into the Learning Commons and Media Center. Guidance is again stacked above administration, so public doesn't have to walk through the entire facility. More maker spaces, the Edge Studio that Farmington currently has, and there's even thoughts, we could even expand in the future if we chose to do so. Have room for that, and a green roof potentially. We could walk right out. And this is again the mezzanine levels of the auditorium and studio black box theater. So that's the uppermost level, and that's the example of what we have in mind for the amphitheater, where it's really not, it's a multi-purpose use here. It double dips as a large group gathering space, and it uses it as a vertical circulation as well. So it's taking advantage of both conditions. And it could be a good social component for students at school too. And I believe that's it. That's it. So with that, I'm sure there's a lot of questions. So, and again, this is all a work in progress, and we want your comments because we're going to this will be evolved. Well, it's this is the newest part of the additions that have been put on the complex, so it's new. So we're trying to repurpose it. It would be nice if we could just keep them classrooms, which we could, but it doesn't really solve the remoteness issue in a sprawl for kids to travel. So we've been thinking that it may get repurposed for something else at this time.
Okay, I know there's a lot of questions, and we're going to try and keep this as orderly as possible. There's a microphone off to the side, if you wouldn't mind utilizing that side as well. There's a microphone for those on the left side. Do they both work, I assume? And if you could limit your questions to maybe one or two. We have lots of project team members in attendance, town administrators, educators, the design team, the construction manager, your owner's rep, and I'll try and filter your question to the right individuals.
I have two questions. One question is, how many classrooms are we planning to have, and how many children will they service? In other words, if the town grows, what is the limit? So we wouldn't be looking at this again in 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Second one is, what is the length of time that you believe this will take to either renovate or build a new one? And just to let you know, I'm definitely for building a new one. All this other stuff going on, if anybody ever had taken on a project to repair something in their house, costs twice as much, twice as long, and it never looks the way you wanted it to. But getting back to that, if we do decide to do either one, where will the children go during that period of time? Will they be in other schools? What will happen to them during that time in their education? And what's the period of time?
Okay, I'll address the latter question in terms of the phasing and the schedule. This is going to be a multi-year project, whether it's a renovation or new construction. We actually have a meeting scheduled next week to start looking at those phasing options. Obviously, new construction's a lot easier, right, because you can build a new building while you're occupying the existing facility. Renovations get a bit more complicated. We've been involved with projects that took 3 years that were 10 phases. I mean, first and foremost, you have to provide a facility that you can educate, the students and make sure that they're safe, and that'll be primary focus number one. But sometimes those renovation projects, while seemingly less expensive because it's less new construction, might cost more money because it takes a longer time to actually construct. But we're going to be developing costing models that include phasing and schedule over the next few weeks. It's premature at this point to talk about specifically how long it would take and what we would do with the students. I know we want to try and minimize portables because we know that the state doesn't reimburse for portables. But we will hopefully by the middle of January have those concepts worked out. In terms of the size, the number of students, and potential for growth in classrooms, I don't know, Paul, you want to address that?
Everything we've been working on is based on a demographic report that shows the design load for students is 1,346 students. And that we have, I think, 42 classrooms total. That's what it translates to.
Nope. Yes?
I'm just curious on all three options for special education students, not just wheelchair accessibility, but just OT space, sensory space, where are they built into all three options?
Let's just stay up here.
Yeah, no, they are. We've considered them. We didn't label every room and every space on these documents, but that's part of the program, and they're accounted for. All, in every case, they're on the main level, and we try to put that special services near the nurse when at all possible. There are special ed resource rooms within the cluster, and then there's the current STEP program and sales program and ED program are not in the clusters, outside the clusters, but there's some learning centers within the clusters currently.
Yes, sir.
I had kind of a follow-up question to what the first woman asked. My question, I guess, is more for the future. So in your future presentations, I would love to almost see a grid comparing the total space, for example, the cost, obviously, but also the timing and how long each of the three options would take. I also would like to know that you thought through the fact that, as she also mentioned, timing often goes over. So for example, if you're planning to work during the summer, that there's contingencies in place for if you're not done by the time a specific section is complete when the kids come back in the fall. And then that brings me to the kids. While we're obviously planning for the next 50 years, I hope we also are taking into consideration the kids who are here right now, especially. Looking, for example, you mentioned kids who receive special education and the number of distractions. The students who were touring us were absolutely amazing, by the way. They were wonderful. They mentioned how they're late to class on a regular basis. And I'm thinking with construction in place, obviously there's obstacles by virtue of sections being closed potentially, but also the noise factor. And that goes beyond the health. So when we have our future presentations, would it be possible to have almost a side-by-side comparison of both the cost, the square footage, the classrooms, and then how it might impact also the future? Because as we were talking to the students, they're saying one of the impacts that we have as far as more than anything, space is class size. So class size is big as a result of lack of space, but so are class offerings. So right now, it's hard for me to envision. All three offerings look great for different reasons, but I can't really compare how it will impact the kids. Thank you.
Yeah, good questions, and we will definitely, as we're progressing through this journey, developing phasing options and construction logistic options. There will certainly be some discomfort, for a short while the construction's underway, but at no point will students be in any harm's way, or faculty or staff, for that matter. You've got a great construction management firm hired. We've done a number of education projects, and we understand how to construct new with existing. But certainly, as we're developing the costs, phasing will be a part of that, as well as the schedule. So, a new construction schedule might be like this, but a renovation schedule might be like that. And we have to factor that additional time in, because time is money in our world.
Yes.
So when you see further presentations, and when we're presenting to the building committee and the Board of Ed and the Town Council the options, schedules will be a part of it, because schedules equal money.
And I'm guessing there's a lot more of a range if you're looking at the renovation as opposed to a new one. You'll be able to give a more concise approximate estimation for what a new building would cost as opposed to renovations, because of the unforeseen future.
Yeah, we'll be able to ferret that out. I mean, there are terms that we use every day called contingencies, and from a financial standpoint, we may have more dollars in contingencies for renovations for that exact reason. We're also doing due diligence exercises now to see what is currently exists within the facility that might be an exposure financially down the road. But we've been doing this long enough that we can identify those potential exposures and keep them minimized.
Thank you.
In listening to some of these questions and the proposal, my personal inclination, I'll just say, would be that I'd be leaning towards the idea of a new school, but were there other options that the building committee considered besides these three that were, in other words, concrete proposals that were rejected, and what was the rationale for rejecting those in general terms?
You want to take that one, Bill?
When we put out the RFP for architectural services, we had proposals from 10 different architectural firms throughout the state of Connecticut. And so we narrowed that down to 4 that we actually had gone through the interview process with. Castle Booz came up to the top of the list because of their qualifications and their vision. In fact, they're the only ones that brought an educational consultant on board to be part of their team. So we were impressed with that. Our charge as a committee was that through our negotiation and contract with them was that they were going to come up with 2 options for renovations, additions, and 1 option for a new school. So this is in response to that contract.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, first of all. And secondly, I'd like to add to what the other gentleman was saying about the cost contingencies as you look into the project. If you can also, I know we can't foresee the future, but they were, on our tour, they were talking about one of the bathrooms that's not in service right now and had not been in service, for 6 months or something like that. And are there things that are structurally in this building that you will come upon when you're renovating the 1960s and 50s area versus maybe renovating the 2003 area that you will just have to, you won't be able to renovate it the way you want to, or it would be at additional cost? So that's one thing that I would love to see if the construction people are on top of that and kind of knowing what the building codes were back then versus what they are now, and if that is going to be a problem and a cost.
The design team will do a structural analysis of the existing facility, and it would be nice to take the whole building apart and see what's behind every wall and above every ceiling, but you can't physically do that. So you base decisions and judgments based upon what you have for current documentation.
Right.
That doesn't mean the documentation is 100% correct.
Right.
But when you're building a project budget, which
Yeah.
is what you're leaning towards, we customarily build in contingencies to account for the unforeseen conditions, the unknowns. So in a
Okay,
new
great.
building, we'll have less contingencies because really it's below grade. And if we do our jobs early enough, we'll know what's below grade before we start construction. But in an existing building renovation like this, yeah, there may be lots of things that are above the ceiling that, the documentation that we have and trying to get up there to poke and prod just won't give us the full story. So you
Right.
build contingencies to account for that. The last
Right.
thing that we want is to have to go back for more money.
Right, and that's what I'd love to see up front in the proposals when it comes time to do that. The other thing that I would have a question on is, on all three proposals, you're showing different parking, and I know parking can be a huge issue as we move toward the future. With an increased number of students, we're going to need an increased number of parking spots. I don't know if we gain or subtract, or if it's just equal in all those parking spaces.
So as you can see now, we're very conceptual, but our goal is to match what's there, if not add parking in all of those schemes. When we go through our next rounds, we'll start to get more and more detailed where we actually lay out each of the parking lots and go through that. So each one of these, we're tasked with trying to match what's here, if not expand upon it, if it's feasible.
Next.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
My first question is about clusters. We talked a lot about clusters tonight and the layout, and really, it seems like all of the designs around clusters. To the best of my knowledge, the way that the students are today, they are not learning in clusters or teams. So is that a shift in the, they're not at the high school, though. So is that a shift in the learning concepts as well? So I think that is a big question. Maybe that's more for Board of Ed or admin.
Yeah, I'll let Kathy respond to that, but I can honestly tell you, in
Yep.
the high schools that we've been involved with,
Yep.
clusters. That seems to be the trend.
I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, it's
Regionally,
just,
yep.
it's different, and we
Yep.
have not talked about clusters in the high school before, so that is a shift. So I'm curious about that. And then my next questions are, in option A, it seemed like there was no renovation to the cafeteria or cafeteria space, which I know is a huge issue, so that is a little concerning.
I think the level of documentation is very rudimentary, very conceptual. I think the
Okay.
thought is that there would be some level of renovations in there to address the needs of the sightline issues.
Okay.
And expanding it for the larger student body that you have today. But, those drawings are very, very, conceptual at nature, and as they get further developed, you'll see more detail about what would actually happen in each of those spaces.
Okay, and stating up front, I'm 100% for new school. So my next two questions or comments are, keeping the old gym, which is what its name is, the old gym in Plan A and B, that doesn't really make much sense to me. As well as in Plan B, I think it was, all of the new mechanicals were in one of the oldest buildings, the 1928 building. And again, I'm not an expert on any of this, but it just doesn't make sense to put all of the new mechanicals in the oldest building. So I guess my biggest question is the clusters question.
Okay. Kathy, you want to address that concept?
So back in 2010, the school district created a vision of the graduate, and that vision of the graduate was developed by the community through interviews and sessions with our community, both internal and external. And our vision of the graduate is a set of 21st century skills like collaboration and communication, problem solving, innovation, self-direction, resourcefulness, things like that. and a core body of knowledge. So Farmington is known for our content, but what we wanted to make a shift to was 21st century skills so that our students are prepared for the world that awaits them. There's a lot of complexities with globalization and some of the environmental issues, and we are entering an age of innovation. So we have to prepare our students for a very different world, and that does rely on students being able to learn in a more integrated way. So starting in kindergarten in Farmington, students learn in a very integrated way. It's a very active learning process rather than a passive. When I grew up, it was a very passive learning process where we listened to the teacher, we filled out what we needed to do, and worksheets and things like that. It's not like that any longer. Students and teachers are partners in classrooms, and there's a lot of open-ended problem solving going on each day. Students' role in the learning process has been elevated. So when we've 7 years ago started on this journey, we have students now who have gone through the grade levels and experienced a very different education. And at the high school, we are at a point where that same type of learning is going on in our classrooms, and what's holding us back is the facility, the fact that science and math aren't as close to one another in proximity, that even when we look at some of our tech ed, it's far away from some of the other subject areas like art that really could be integrated in a more integrated cluster approach. Innovative, integrated course offerings could organically emerge just by having teachers close to one another. So we really are ready for this. We're trying to do that in a 20th century building, but I think that it would really be maximized in this cluster idea. And when you look at some of the needs to do that, a building needs to be flexible so that if in 20 years, educators decided that, the future is about keeping students in subject areas, you could still take those clusters and make them a science cluster or a math cluster or an English cluster. So we want to have that flexibility. We want breakout areas. Many of our students now, because they are so self-directed, if you have a classroom that then goes into a breakout area and there's glass, the teacher can still have a view of those students, but the students can work on projects together, and they don't have to be right in that classroom. Some students need quiet space, so we have some quiet breakout spaces with walls in them, again glass, but so that for some students, they're distracted and they need smaller spaces. So it's trying to create that flexibility so that we meet the needs of all students, but we're also meeting the needs of our curriculum, our programs, and preparing our students for a complex global society that really is seeking innovators and problem solvers. I hope that answers the question.
Hi, it's me again. I have a follow-up question. If I heard correctly, you've mentioned that there is 42 classrooms. Am I correct? Yes. So with 42 classrooms, we're looking at about 30 children to a classroom with 1,300 full capacity?
No, I did not include this. There's 12 science classrooms as well.
Okay, so it'd be the 42 plus the 12.
Yes,
So we're
correct.
looking at a little bit greater. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one. The second question I had was, if we were to decide to go with a new school, are you guys planning to keep the old school operational during the period of time that you're building the new school, therefore not making a lot of changes for the kids?
Yeah, the plan would be to keep the existing
Until you're done.
school in use, with limited, upgrades, because it'll be,
Of course.
at some point raised and turned into fields and parking.
Okay,
But, yeah,
thank you.
That would be the concept, yep.
Hi.
Hi.
It sounds like cost and timing and transition plans are all to be determined, and I'm sure everybody's interested in seeing how that develops. But can you give us an idea of what the plan is from here? How will a decision be made? How will the public be involved in that decision, and what the timing might be of that?
Sure.
The second question, I have a sophomore here, and anybody who has any child that you drive to school here, you know how hard that is to get into the school. So is there any plans, I know there's still, all three plans showed one entrance into the school. has there been any studies or any preference among the options that will alleviate the traffic and the issues in getting in the school in the morning?
Okay, I'll handle the former. We do have a very prescriptive timing laid out for this process, working with the town manager and her staff, the building committee, the design team. We have about 100 individual events with associated dates that get us to an April 27th referendum. From a big picture perspective, the idea is to take the feedback from today, take the feedback from the Board of Ed and the Town Council. The design team will finalize concepts by the end of the month. The construction manager, our firm, will provide concept estimates with cost ranges during the month of January. End of January, the building committee, Board of Ed, Town Council will sign off on a preferred option. We do have a public information session in January, so you'll be able to hear and see how things are evolving. With that preferred option, late January, early February, the design team then further details the documents. One of the three options will be turned to schematic design, which is, again, a further refined level of detail. That'll take us into March with new estimates, and at that point, we'll define an actual project budget. So in January, it'll be a range, from X to Y. Come March, it'll be X or Y. At that point, it'll go through planning and zoning, all of the other approvals, building committee, Board of Ed, Town Council, and then ultimately referendum in April. So it's been laid out every date between November and April 27th is identified.
So at what point will the public is not going to be involved in the decision directly? We're not voting or anything on which option?
The public is, the building committee meetings are open. They're open public meetings, but ultimately the building committee will make that decision based upon feedback, from these meetings. But no, it's not going to be a referendum vote for everybody votes on which option they want. Ultimately, the building committee will recommend an option that the Board of Ed and the Town Council will approve. And these are all open meetings. Okay. And they'll see what you see. And they'll be able to provide feedback like you're providing feedback.
Okay, so the cost will be known the range will be known in January, but the final cost will be known in March, but the decision about which option is going to be before March?
Yeah, the decision on which option they want to go with will be late January, early February, and that will come with a cost range. Because the designs are very conceptual, it's hard to pinpoint an exact dollar figure. So we'll have a range of plus or minus, 10% or something like that. Once we have more detailed documentation, then we can put a final number that presumably will be within that range for ultimate town approval.
Okay, thanks. And then the parking traffic?
Luke, you can handle that one.
Yeah, so each of the schemes, we started to look at changing some of the traffic flows, changing some of the patterns there. Again, we're looking at big picture right now as each of these schemes is refined over the rest of this month and then through January, and then ultimately the final one. We'll continue to look at that. So we haven't looked at was things like the entrances out and possibly another turning lane with Route 4 or separating, things like that. Those will continue to be looked at. So we will definitely take into consideration what happens now, which we know it's very congested for drop-offs, trying to get in and out of here and trying to look at alleviating as much of that as we can. We did look at a few other options of trying to find a second access point out, but the problem is we didn't want to look at taking the traffic that's currently on here and introduce it into the residential areas that are directly adjacent here. The second was if we did and exited those out, they don't have traffic signals at the end of those residential areas, which would further cause backups. Speaking with the state traffic, trying to introduce more traffic lights within that short period really isn't feasible. So we are looking at trying to create the best options with utilizing the current exit and entrance in the school, but changing the internal circulation around the school with each of the schemes.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn left if you don't mind. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you for being here tonight. school has a really great robotics program, and they were lucky enough to have somebody donate warehouse space where they really took advantage of it, and they did a lot of great learning there. They also did a lot of collaborative work and a lot of independent work there, and it was great to go there and see the kids working like that. And I just wanted to know, like that robotics program, it takes up a lot of space. Is it anything like for that being accommodated in this, in the new designs?
Yes, there is space carved out in the new facility for the robotics program.
Okay, and then, not every kid is going to go to a 4-year program, and I'm just wondering, I heard you call it the tech space, or, what kind of programs is that going to include in regards to training? I know from personally that like every tool and die shop in Connecticut has help wanted signs out, and so I think we should be thinking about technical education for people who want to go that route. Is there going to be any plans for that?
Well, you can confirm, Kathy or Paul, but I believe there's a wood shop and an automotive program, culinary as well, STEM, robotics, any other specialty technical makerspace? Yeah.
The current tech ed space is small for our program, and it is an expanding program. So in the ed specs, there is an expansion or increased square footage for the programming. There are more spaces that are considered maker spaces, which very much align to a tech ed hands-on approach, but with 3D printers and things like that. So we definitely see that as an important part of our curriculum, and we see that more and more students are looking for those opportunities. We have heard at times, well, there are technical high schools, but our students do want to be have a comprehensive high school experience. And so we want to provide those opportunities here at the high school. We have an excellent staff here for tech ed, but we do believe that there could be more integration. Many of you have heard of STEM, but there's also STEAM, where you add art into, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we absolutely are building spaces for the future, and knowing that that is absolutely an area of need in Connecticut and beyond.
Thank you.
Hi. I have a few questions. The first one is piggybacking on what someone was talking about with the budget and those questions. And we haven't talked about any sort of state reimbursement with that budget, so I'm just wanting to throw that out there. I'm curious, when we are given the different funding, what this means. I know we've done other school builds, like for example, Westwoods. If we didn't build that year, we were going to not be eligible for state reimbursement and things of that nature. Because looking at either of these options, or they're all going to, I believe, have a pretty hefty price tag just in general, because they are major renovations. My second comment or question is, first I tell you I'm thrilled that we're going to have a real entrance again, and I just want to ask that I hope there's designated parent parking there, because it is a nightmare to get into the building in general if you are a parent. So that's just an aside. And I also appreciate you not diverting traffic through that neighborhood, because that's where I live. The question I had about the 1928 building, the original, we've talked about keeping that structure, which I am a proponent of, and using it for Board of Ed buildings. Are there renovations tied to that, or are we saying we're leaving that building as is? So that's just sort of a question, because some of those spaces we've said they're there, and I don't know if that really means nothing happens to them or not. And then my final comment gets back to the clusters. And maybe this isn't the correct forum, but as a parent, I'd be very interested in understanding if this means we're moving to some sort of team concept, because that's what it looks like to me, with the way it's structured, like it feels like an IAR. And what are some other schools that have done this, and what are the results? I'd just like to understand a little bit about the benefits, or does this just give us more flexibility to maybe change scheduling to get to like a block scheduling, which would be in my opinion, fantastic. So I'll stop talking.
Okay.
So you can answer.
I'll take the easy one, the state reimbursement. That's easy.
Okay.
We're going to look to maximize the reimbursement for the town of Farmington. We're still in very early stages of development, of conversations with the state. We've had multiple meetings with the state. The Office of School Construction Grant and Review is the entity that we meet with. And they are aware of the project. They're on board. They want to help. And they will work with us, and we will work with them to make sure that everything that the town of Farmington is eligible to be reimbursed for will be reimbursed. But it's way too early to even think about what that might be. When we're talking about budgets in the spring, we will have estimated town of Farmington share as well as estimated state reimbursement share. But that won't be until probably, the March timeframe when we're starting to get final costing models in line from the construction manager. So I hope that addresses the state reimbursement question. In terms of the parent parking at the entry, yes?
Yeah, that's typical of new schools when we redesign. We have the drop-offs, we have the main entry, but we also provide for not only accessible and handicap parking, but visitor parking that's right there adjacent, so that those people coming during the day for a meeting or part of a classroom or something like that, they have the ability to come and go right from there.
Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all options have the 1928 building renovated in some capacity. The new construction option shows it as the Board of Ed space. The other two options, the renovations and alterations, extensions, are programmatic space, correct? Right. Okay, so they will be renovated. And then in terms of the clusters and results and team concept, I don't know, have you, Paul, have you seen results from other?
So at IAR, there are teams, and they are integrated. The subject areas are integrated. At the high school, there are departments, and those departments meet. And then there is teaming that goes on by course. So teachers do team every week by course. So I think with this design, I don't think it would be driving us, say, to do a team approach. But it would provide the opportunity, which we hear from the teachers, for integration of curriculum and collaboration among and between departments, where sometimes that's something that has to be forced because they're just not in close proximity to each other. I've done lots of focus groups with teachers in their first 4 years here, and they'll say, gee, there was a whole year before I met this other teacher on the other side of the building. So they do, I think that it would just provide more kind of organic work together among and between departments. That's not to say that if in the future, say we did a 9th grade academy and we thought teaming would be a good thing for 9th graders, specifically because of their transition from a middle to a high school, I think this design would lend itself to that, but I wouldn't say that we're doing it because we're moving in that direction. We're doing it more so that we're aligning our curriculum and programming to our vision of the graduate, to the priorities that we set many, many years ago, and they continue to evolve, and we are at a place where we're ready to do this type of work. We are doing this type of work, but in a facility that doesn't really help us very much in doing that work.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So my question was also related to funding. Would you please elaborate how exactly state reimbursement works, and if you don't get a certain amount of cash from the state, is that left to the taxpayer, which is us? Especially knowing that the state is in a huge deficit currently today.
Yeah, so regardless of the state, fiscal situation, the state has a process where they reimburse towns for school construction projects, renovations or new constructions. And the percent varies based upon renovations or new constructions. And, that will, in fact, be part of the equation. When we're developing budgets, we're developing, again, costing models. Once we know what we're renovating, what's eligible for reimbursement in the renovation, what's eligible for the new construction versus ineligible. We'll know, within a pretty good range of what the state's share will be. Again, more towards the February, March timeframe versus, December or January. But the state definitely will be participating in this project. But I can't give you, right now, the reimbursement rate is 29% for a renovation for what's eligible and 19% for new construction. And that's all we know at this point in terms of what the state would contribute is the percent.
And where would the rest of that come from?
Typically, towns bond for the balance of the construction costs. It'd be the town share.
My other question is, of the three options we saw today, has it ever been considered a fourth option where you build a completely second new high school as a second high school as part of the town?
So keep this high school and just build a
Keep it
second high
as it
school?
is, do what you got to do to keep it up to code. I mean, my fear is that in 30, 40 years, you're going to run into the same thing again, and just why not build a second school altogether? You're going to need it anyways.
Yeah, I don't think that option was ever considered for a second high school while maintaining this as a high school. I know usually projects evolve over state enrollments, whether they're increasing or decreasing. The state will allow you to build a facility, whether it's a renovation or new, based upon the highest projected enrollment over 8 years. They don't care 40 years down the road. If you have a problem in 40 years, you can come back to the state and seek additional funds for a new program. But I don't think it was ever an option to keep the existing high school and look to build a second high school in town.
Will that ever be considered?
I don't think it's part of this program, no.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A green roof was mentioned. Is this going to be a LEEDs building?
It'll be at a minimum high-performance building, which is the state requirement for state-funded projects in terms of which is, in our world, high performance is the same thing as LEED, the Leadership in Environmental Energy Design. The only difference is you don't get the plaque that sits on the wall. And I don't know if we've been charged with getting LEED certification, but either way, it'll be highly sustainable.
Does that mean solar or?
There are lots of options. The LEED, the high performance, has a series of criteria: energy, atmosphere, sustainability, rapidly renewable materials, biking, advocating low emission vehicles, having specialized parking for low emission vehicles, carpooling, van pooling. There's 6 or so sort of major categories. Solar's one of them. Geothermal's one of them. Those are more expensive, though.
In the initial install, but then year over year.
Yeah, and if we're looking at those options, we look at payback, when will those pay themselves off? And we'll be able to run those analysis as we're developing the sustainable features for the projects.
And what about parking decks, like a 2-level? Was that ever considered, or is it allowed in the town? I don't even know.
I don't know if it's, hasn't been, I'm not even sure it's required, because we might have enough surface parking to accommodate.
But it would free up space for a 4th field if you went up as opposed to ground level.
It's something we can certainly look at. I'll be honest, looking at the parking areas, none in particular is large enough to swap out with a field, but it's certainly a great suggestion. As we look at it, we can look at that potential and then work with you to run numbers on where those would change the budget.
Okay. Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
A couple things. The first is a bit of a reassurance. A couple questions ago, there was a man who mentioned the robotics program. I just wanted to reassure everyone that as an alumnus and current mentor of that team, we do plan to regularly keep our ears to the ground in this process. So if we have a concern or a question, be sure someone from the team will let these guys know. And another one is hopefully to nip a problem in the bud before it shows up. One thing the student tour guides mentioned is that noise from the auditorium, like during a concert or a play, can interfere with noise coming from the gymnasium if there is a game going on simultaneously. And I noticed that in at least two of the concepts, they had the larger gym, whether new or not, was still in relative close proximity to the auditorium. Is this potential issue going to affect the design at all?
Well, I'll let the design team speak to that. I know the current facilities probably don't have the right acoustical treatment for either side to absorb the noise, which is why there's the transfer of the noise. You can, and I've seen, large volumes of space, auditoriums, gymnasiums in close proximity, but when they're treated acoustically appropriately, you couldn't tell what was happening on the other side of the wall. And there's an acquisition on their design team that will evaluate not only the large volume spaces, but even the classrooms to make sure that you don't have that transfer of noise that would create the disruption. That's also part of the high-performance building requirements is making sure that you have acoustically separated and treated spaces for all spaces, not just auditoriums and gymnasiums, so that you don't have that disruption.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. So I just wanted to start with a couple of compliments or comments, I guess. I was very happy to see the increased space for special services students. Been hearing about lack of privacy, and certainly on our tour we got a real view of what that entails. And so for occupational therapy, physical therapy, that kind of thing that happens, it sounds like that's going to be addressed in this new space, whatever option we go with. I think that's really key. The expansion of tech ed and bringing back culinary and supporting robotics, I think is key, that we continue to serve all students and not necessarily college prep, or we're also offering those college prep students some opportunity to dabble and experience those types of course offerings. That's been a shortcoming, and I think that's really going to make a big improvement. The cluster concept, I think, is something that is really exciting because teachers are trying to teach in a different model now, and this building is not supporting that, and it's not supporting the students in the way they're being taught and the way they need to learn, and to prepare them to go out into the world that's going to demand those skills that they're able to learn in that kind of environment. So I think, although with flexibility, I would think to go back when and if a pendulum would swing again, or the educational philosophy or requirements require that, and if we're talking 20, 30, 40 years down the road, that there's enough flexibility in this design to accommodate that. I did have a question about cafeteria space. I apologize, I wasn't here for the presentation for the first design, but we have an assurance that the cafeteria space is going to be large enough to no longer affect scheduling and students eating at 10 in the morning and that sort of problem?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then lastly, I know you don't want to get too much into state reimbursement and all those different factors. There's a lot of different factors as far as square footage and reimbursement based on different designs. I guess I would just like to say to the building committee and the town council and the Board of Education and the community as well, that state reimbursement does not always mean, if we're maximizing state reimbursement, that doesn't always mean we're getting the best design, and that shouldn't be a priority necessarily. You have to kind of look at the big picture, all the different designs, all the pros, all the cons of each, and take that all into account. So we're not always chasing those higher state dollars and then maybe getting a subpar solution. This is really about a long-term comprehensive solution, and our students and our community having a facility that is kind of what they're deserving of and what has been a long time coming in this community. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a couple questions on the site plan for the new building. Number one, the perimeter road, as it goes around the outfield fence, the baseball, and abuts the properties along Knollwood Road. There's a very narrow buffer there, and I'd like to know how much of the town space or the property, how close will that road get to the property line that separates the houses and the high school property? Is that going to be a two-lane road? Number one, and the second part of that would be how close it'll get to the properties.
So the first question, yes, it will be a two-way road because we'll have to bring parents, students, teachers up and then allow them to also exit out the way that we've shown it right now so that they're completely separated from where buses would go. As far as exact dimensions, we don't know yet because we're still very early in conceptual design, but we have walked the property a number of times, especially with the town engineer, and looked at some of the mapping, and there is enough room from the outside field of that baseball field to fit that in. Part of that new scheme is that may be addressed where that outfield fence may shift slightly to accommodate that. In addition, when the road would be put in, we would look at making sure there is enough buffer. So whether it be a mixture of natural vegetation and potentially man-made fences, things like that, so that we can make sure that you still have your buffer and your screening there. We're not looking to impede on any of the property lines that are there currently as part of this.
Also, the emergency access, that's now a walkway from the street, Crestwood there, to the parking lot. So you're going to maintain a walkway for students that walk to school, and how will you deal with vehicle traffic and the student pedestrians getting to the building?
So we still would maintain any of the pedestrian access points. You know, one of the things we didn't talk about is we know there's also the walkway that comes up from Route 4 and they walk the hill and then the stairs. You know, we would have to look at that as part of the project. But that again, although it would be used for emergency access, we'd still maintain the pedestrian access way through. They would have openings or gates that are simply large enough for pedestrians but not for vehicles, and it would be maintained so that they can continue to come through. Any of the points that we find around the campus, I call it the campus, the site where we find that students are able to walk to the school, we'd look to maintain those and provide the proper access from that to the school, either with walkways or pathways from there. So that would be part of the next round of plans.
Well, a student walking now doesn't have to cross a roadway. When you put the roadway in, they'll have to cross a roadway to get to the building.
Correct, or at some point they would. What we've done in the past, so we've designed pathways or walkways that are adjacent to that, and we have designated crossing areas, and they're separated with some sort of barriers so that they are separated and students can't walk. And then we look at different traffic controls at those crossing points, either stop signs, raised crosswalks, other things like that. In nature. So that'll be part of what's worked out as we get further into design to make sure there's safe crossings for those students.
And I have another question. If you could help me visualize the elevation of the new building with existing elevations, as the football field maybe being one and this parking lot out here maybe being another. How far are you going to keep that bank where it is and build on top of that knoll? Is that where the new building's going to go?
No, that we know that large bank that comes would come down, but as far as elevations, we're not there yet. We haven't gotten to the point to figure out floor-to-floor elevations, which will then determine if we excavate out some of where that fields are in the new to drop that field in lower, those kind of things yet. So those can vary, and Paul, correct me, I mean, your ceiling floor to floor can go from 12 to 18, plus feet. So there's a very big difference when you're talking 3 stories, but we just don't quite know, depending on the schemes and chase spaces and what kind of mechanical units yet, which will define all that as we look into it. So we'll know more as we progress more, but right now I wouldn't feel comfortable to be able to address the overall height on there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I have 2 concerns regarding if we go with the choice of a renovation. One of them, the high school I attended, actually I went to Avon High School, The fall I entered, they were completing a renovation, and it wasn't completed on time, so we had to start the school year with the academic wing. They didn't even have the windows in yet, and we were having classes throughout the building, like in the gymnasium. And so I'm wondering if we do go down the road of having a renovation, how it will impact the students. And secondly, and almost more importantly, I'm concerned about the environmental issues on the students and the staff if we do decide to do a renovation and not a new building. If they're in the building, not just while the building's being renovated, but the after effects of perhaps renovating spaces where there could be asbestos and other environmental issues going on.
Okay. When we're talking about renovation projects or new construction projects, when we're developing project schedules, we will often build in schedule contingencies. So for many of our school projects, the required completion date by the contractor is May 1st, or maybe at the latest June 1st, which gives us all of June, all of July, all of August for scheduling issues that may crop up as a result of unforeseen conditions. We know if you set the completion date, the day before faculty arrive to start setting up classrooms, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be looking at issues because things happen during construction, weather events, unforeseen conditions, especially with a renovation, like you said. We could take down a ceiling and all of a sudden there's a structure there that we didn't anticipate and it's going to require redesign and new products. But when you build in schedule contingency, like we have financial contingencies for the unknown, we can still accommodate the unforeseen and get students in and faculty in when necessary. So we'll employ those types of scheduling strategies when we're developing, once we know what option we're doing, and we're working with O&G and Castle Booze, and we're laying out the project schedule, we'll make sure that there's a safety net, if you will, on the scheduling side. And hope, through good management practices that we don't have an issue. Because, we know that if, students can't return on September 1st or August 28th, that's a problem. That'll be a big problem for the superintendent. And bless you. And she'll be making sure when we're in January of that year that we're on schedule. But I'm confident with the team that's been assembled that we won't allow that to happen where that's an issue. It's easy to say when we're looking at pencil drawings. But that's how we approach projects from a scheduling. In terms of environmental, first of all, the state doesn't allow you to do any asbestos abatement with students on campus. So if we were doing a renovation project and we were doing asbestos abatement, like every other one of our projects in Connecticut, it'll be done over the summer, when students vacate. And if there's a summer program going on, well, we'll look to maybe, relocate those summer programs to another facility during those, 8 to 10 weeks where the contractor has the building, sort of by themselves. At no point will students be exposed to any environmental hazards as the course of construction. When we're developing logistics plans with the contractor, there are demarcation zones that get set up. So if you're not doing environmental remediation and you're just doing simple construction, we'll put up permanent barriers to make sure that there's no cross-pollination of construction and students. Contractors will have their own separate entrance, their own separate parking. We've developed logistic plans where contractors park literally, a quarter or half mile away and have to hoof it, because we don't want them, crossing with the students. We'll stagger or ensure that contractors don't arrive during drop-off and pickup periods because that's when all the buses and all the parents are here to drop off and pick up. So we'll make sure that construction deliveries, could you imagine during drop-off having an 18-wheeler come up the access drive off of Route 4 and he's having a hard time turning that corner because it's tight and everybody's backing up? So what we'll say is, okay, no deliveries between 6:30 and 7:30. And conversely, no deliveries between 3 or 4, whenever students get out. All of these will be developed during the course of design so that there's no crossing of construction activities and students. I mean, we do this for a living. You know, we've done dozens of projects in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and I don't care where you are. I have students in Canton, and the last thing I want is for my students, my kids, to be exposed to, you know, to hazards of construction. And that's a very legitimate question that you have, and as we're making these presentations throughout the next years, you know, you'll see how we're going to set up the construction so that students and faculty aren't in harm's way.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
How you doing? I just wanted to say I'm excited to be in Farmington while this is happening. I think it's the thing that a citizen should be happy to be able to be involved in. And my children won't see the benefits of a new high school. They'll have graduated, but I still think it's a great thing. And I'll vote for the brand new high school, by the way. The question
at any cost?
Yeah, well, here you go. Here's the question.
Oh, okay.
Something that I haven't seen because I don't know what high schools cost. So, is there a ballpark number? I'm curious.
No.
Okay. Cool. But two, is there a date? Is there a move-in date? Is there this project must be completed by? I've missed it. I haven't seen it, so I'm just curious. Is it tied to the warning we received? Or is it just tied to whatever the schedule might be? So I'm curious about a date.
Yep, the only concrete date that we have right now is that we need to get our grant application into the state of Connecticut by June 30th, 2017. All other dates are nowhere near being set because as we described earlier, you know, a new construction, you know, will take less time, even though it's a, you know, X amount of square feet of new building. You know, when you're talking about, and you looked at some of the phasing options or the renovation options, that's going to have to be phased over a longer duration. So when we get to the period of showing the options to the building committee, then we'll have some dates. But I couldn't tell you today what they would be. Yes, sir.
All right, I'll make it quick. We've hired an architect, obviously, in a construction management firm. Once we've decided on a project and you've given us pricing, does it go to bid or we've set already that this company's doing the project and that's it? That's the cost and that's what we're going to go with?
Well, once the budget is set, that's set, right? I mean, if we do our jobs, the design team does their job, and the construction manager does their jobs, you know, the amount of money on that referendum is all that will be needed for this project. And ideally, some money goes back. But having said that, you know, all three firms have been retained for pre-referendum services. So if at the end of the referendum period, the building committee decided to make a change to the team, they have that right. But, you know, if we do our jobs right and we get a project that is meets the programmatic needs and at a cost that is comfortable to the town, and you all approve it, the hope, obviously, is that we're all retained throughout the life of the project. But that's just for the management of it. If you're talking about subcontractors bidding the work, that'll obviously happen. Yes, it has to. It's public construction, public bidding.
All right, so I guess it's a budget number, but you mentioned maybe it would come in under.
No, it's a budget. It's a budget. You know, it's in our world that is not to exceed budget.
Okay. All right.
But the scope of work, I mean, if you're asking about bidding, I mean, you know, if we have X amount of dollars, I mean, the construction will be X minus % for all the other soft costs that you don't bid on.
I'm more like in a residential thing. You hire an architect, you get a couple bids in, and you go with a contractor. But it seems like we have a contractor.
You have a construction manager, and not all, but one of their primary responsibilities is to manage all of the dozens of subcontractors.
Mm-hmm.
So O&G, who's been doing this longer than probably anybody in the state of Connecticut, you know, they'll bid out the concrete, the site, the steel, the carpentry, the drywall, the painting, the mechanical, the electrical, the controls, you name it. They'll bid it out to multiple subcontractors who will all provide a bid to them, and then they'll they'll package it all, and they'll all work under O&G's, blanket contract with the town. But the town will have one contract, and that'll be with O&G. All the other subcontractors will contract with O&G.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I
Okay.
just
have another one?
was curious how it worked. No, that does answer it, but I just didn't know if we try, O&G, whatever, whoever, this guy, and we get the best price, or we just go with
So,
this.
and they did that. They solicited proposals from multiple construction management firms.
So the Farmington Building Committee.
Yep, the Farmington Building Committee issued a request for proposal for architects, for owners' representatives, and for construction managers, and multiple firms submitted proposals to manage the project during this pre-referendum period for the town. In your world, if you're in residential, what you would do is you would hire an architect, design a floor plan and elevations in a house,
Right.
and then you'd put it out to bid to 5 or however many contractors to bid it. They'd submit a bid, and you'd pick the lowest bidder, and they would build it for you. We've done that. It's just, it's in layers now.
Gotcha. All
Hire
right,
the construction
pass.
manager first, and then they'll bid out all the subcontractors. So it's all competitive. There's competition everywhere.
Okay. But there isn't, whatever, let's say it's, whatever, $10. If it comes in under, it can come in under budget, and then the
Yep.
town would,
Yep.
okay.
Money goes back.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? No? Bill, you want to?
So that was our owner's project manager, Mark Skolenka, and he's been doing a great job for us. The input that we had this evening, it was exactly what we were looking for, and we want you to keep the cards and letters coming as we go through this process. We have a couple opportunities for that. We have a website, www.fhsbuildingproject.org, to basically see this presentation again. We have it up online, so if you want to study it further and give us more comments, we would appreciate it. And also, we have a Facebook page, FHS Building Project. So that's open for comments and questions and concerns also. So keep talking to us. We're going to be firming this up towards the end of December in terms of the 3 concepts, and we'd love to hear your ideas. So with that, I'd accept the motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Appreciate it.